Okay, so you guys recall that we had found the derivative of natural log of root x squared minus 1. We were able to rewrite it in this form, and then we found y prime was equal to 2x over x squared minus 1, right? But there's going to be some issues, right? When we found the domain, oops, the domain of this function, let's try a different color, right? The domain of this function was from negative infinity to negative 1, but then also negative 1 to 1, and then also 1 to infinity, right? But the original function, right, the original function's domain, its domain was from negative infinity to negative 1 and 1 to infinity. How could it gain points where it's differentiable? Right, that doesn't make too much sense. So the original function only defined for these values, right, unless we include imaginary numbers and things of that nature. So here, right, it seems like this thing is just a nice rational function. It's defined everywhere except where the denominator is 0, right? So at negative 1 and positive 1, we would have an issue, right? We just can't have this part equal to 0. But if you think about how we generated the derivative, right, the step before this, actually I'm not sure that 2 is there, that might have been gone. Let's just, there we go, it was never there. So what we had before this was x over root x squared minus 1 over root x squared minus 1. This was the step before we simplified this thing, right? This was u prime over u. So now, before we put it in this simplified form here, where is this thing defined? Ask yourself that. Right, this thing is also not defined where the denominator is 0, but now we've also got a square root in the denominator. Where's the square root not defined? Think about it for a second. Right, square roots are only defined where it's positive. What values gave you a positive result? Ah, that was only this guy. So this one can't possibly be the domain. You guys see that? Before we reduced this, before we simplified it to this form, this was our original function. And that original function was only defined from negative infinity to negative 1 and 1 to infinity. We lose some of that information when we simplify this. Right, if you guys recall, we simplified this. To this form. And so it seemed like, oh, this form, this is good for everything from, as long as it's not positive or negative 1, we're good, but it doesn't take into account the original form of the function, right? This thing was not defined for any values between negative 1 and 1. And so we see a domain matches up between y, the original, and y prime. So we can't gain values, right? This negative 1 to 1 here, we couldn't gain values. We can only have as much as the original domain or fewer. Thank you.